Have you ever felt like you were standing on the edge of something extraordinary, as if the next chapter of your life is about to unfold with divine purpose? Imagine stepping into a year not just filled with hopes and resolutions, but with unshakable promises straight from the heart of God. Promises so powerful that they have the potential to transform your faith, your perspective, and your destiny. Today, we're not talking about ordinary goals or fleeting wishes. We're diving deep into 7 powerful promises from God that will guide, uplift, and empower you in the year ahead. These aren't just words. They are unbreakable covenants from the Creator of the universe, designed to remind you of His unwavering love, His constant presence, and His divine plans for your life. Whether you're stepping into the new year with excitement or carrying the weight of unanswered prayers, these promises are for you. They are your anchor in storms, your light in darkness, and your guide in uncertainty. But here's the thing. Promises only come alive when we believe in them, claim them, and live them out. And that's exactly what we're going to do together in this video. Before we dive into these life-changing promises, I want to invite you to take a moment and subscribe to this channel. By doing so, you're not just clicking a button. You're becoming part of a community that seeks to spread God's word, bring hope to those in need, and remind the world of His unfailing love. Every subscription helps us reach more lives, share more truth, and build a stronger, faith-filled community. And I'd love for you to start engaging right now. In the comments below, share this powerful declaration. I believe in God's promises for my life this year. Let this be your first step in claiming His extraordinary blessings. So, are you ready? Are you ready to step boldly into the year ahead, holding on to the promises that can change everything? Stay with me, because what we're about to uncover might just be the encouragement, the hope, and the direction you've been waiting for. Let's begin. Number 1, Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Take a moment and let those words sink in. This isn't just a verse from an ancient text. It's a divine promise spoken directly to you, wherever you are right now. How often do we step into a new year with our hearts filled with anticipation, but our minds clouded with doubt? We set goals, draft plans, and whisper prayers, but somewhere deep inside, we wonder, does God really have a plan for me? Is there truly a future worth hoping for on the other side of my struggles? This verse from the book of Jeremiah isn't just comforting, it's foundational. It's God Himself stepping into our chaos, our confusion, and our uncertainty, and saying, I've got you. Your future isn't an accident. Your life isn't random. I have plans, good plans for you. But let's be honest, trusting in this promise isn't always easy. Life has a way of throwing us curveballs, financial struggles, broken relationships, health challenges, dreams delayed or denied. And in those moments, it feels almost impossible to believe that God's plans are still unfolding, still good, still filled with hope. Imagine a young woman named Sarah. Sarah had always been a dreamer. She had plans to build her own business, support her family, and make a difference in her community. But year after year, roadblock after roadblock, her dreams seemed to crumble in her hands. Bills piled up, her confidence faded, and her prayers felt like they were hitting a brick wall. One night, sitting in her room with tears streaming down her face, she stumbled upon this verse. For I know the plans I have for you. It was as if God Himself had leaned down, lifted her chin and whispered, Sarah, I'm not done with you yet. That night didn't magically erase her problems, but it sparked something powerful, hope. Over the next year, Sarah took one small step at a time, trusting, praying, and moving forward. Opportunities she never expected began to unfold. Doors she thought were permanently closed began to crack open. And while her life didn't become perfect, it became deeply meaningful. She realized that God's plans weren't just about her circumstances. They were about her character, her faith, and her trust in Him. And isn't that true for all of us? God's promises don't guarantee a smooth road, but they do promise a certain destination. His plans aren't always revealed in a flash of light or a booming voice from heaven. Sometimes they're seen in the quiet moments, an encouraging word from a friend, a small victory after months of struggle, a whisper of peace in the middle of the storm. So let me ask you, do you trust that God has a plan for your life? Not just a general, vague plan, but a specific, deeply intentional plan tailored just for you, because He does. Every step you take, every prayer you whisper, every tear you cry, it's all seen, known, and woven into His design for your life. But here's the key. You have to hold on to this promise, write it down, speak it over yourself. When doubt creeps in and fear whispers lies, respond with this truth. God knows the plans He has for me, plans to prosper me, not to harm me, plans to give me hope and a future. Right now, I want to invite you to take a bold step of faith. In the comments below, declare this truth. I trust God's plans for my life. Don't underestimate the power of speaking these words out loud, even in a simple comment. There's something transformative about aligning your words with God's promises. As we continue this journey together, remember, God's plans are not bound by time, circumstance, or human limitations. They are eternal, unshakable, and filled with purpose. And no matter what this next year brings, His promises will remain your anchor. Let's keep walking forward, holding tightly to this truth. Because the story God is writing in your life is far from over. It's just beginning. Number 2, Isaiah chapter 40, verse 31. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. There's something undeniably powerful about the image painted in this verse. An eagle soaring effortlessly, high above the storms, untouched by the chaos below. It's a picture of strength, endurance, and unwavering confidence. But if we're honest, most of us don't always feel like eagles, do we? Instead, we often feel more like sparrows caught in a storm, wings heavy, hearts weary, and hope fading with every gust of wind. This promise from Isaiah isn't just poetic imagery, it's a lifeline. It's God reminding us that our strength isn't found in our own abilities, but in Him. When we place our hope in the Lord, when we truly anchor our faith in His promises, we tap into a source of strength that doesn't run dry. This isn't about mustering up more effort or trying harder. It's about surrendering. It's about learning to rest in the assurance that God is the one who carries us when our strength is gone. Think about the eagle for a moment. An eagle doesn't flap its wings tirelessly to stay in the air. Instead, it spreads its wings wide and allows the wind to carry it higher. The eagle trusts the wind. And in the same way, we're called to spread our wings in faith and trust the wind of God's presence to lift us above our circumstances. But how often do we do the opposite? How often do we rely on our own strength, our own plans, and our own limited understanding, only to find ourselves exhausted and discouraged? There's a reason this verse doesn't say, "Those who try harder will renew their strength." No, it says, "Those who hope in the Lord." Let me tell you about David, a man who understood what it meant to rely on God's strength. David was a young shepherd when he faced Goliath, a giant who towered over him with strength and armor that could crush any ordinary opponent. But David wasn't relying on his slingshot or his aim. He was relying on God. In that moment, David wasn't flapping his wings in panic. He was soaring on the wind of God's strength. Years later, when David became king, he faced seasons of betrayal, loss, and deep personal failure. And yet, over and over, we see David returning to this simple truth: "The Lord is my strength and my shield. My heart trusts in Him, and I am helped." Psalm 28:7. David's life wasn't free from hardship, but he learned the secret of endurance. Hope anchored in God. Now think about your own life. What are the giants you're facing? Where do you feel weary, burdened, or on the verge of giving up? Maybe it's your family, your finances, your health, or your faith itself. Whatever it is, know this: God doesn't expect you to carry it alone. When Isaiah speaks about soaring, running, and walking without growing faint, he's showing us the different seasons of life. Sometimes we soar, things fall into place, our prayers are answered, and our spirits feel lifted. Other times we run, we push forward with energy and determination, overcoming obstacles in our path. But then there are seasons when all we can do is walk, step by step, one foot in front of the other. And even in those seasons, God promises that we won't grow faint. Hope in God isn't passive, it's active. It's a choice, a daily decision to trust, to surrender, and to lean into His promises. It's saying, God, I can't do this on my own, but I know you can. Take a moment right now and reflect. Where have you been relying on your own strength? Where do you need to let go and trust the wind of God's presence to carry you? There's a quiet strength in surrender, a peace that comes when we finally release control and trust the one who holds the universe in His hands. And that same God, the one who sets the stars in place and calms the raging seas, He's holding you too. This promise from Isaiah isn't just for the strong, the capable, or the unshaken. It's for the weary, the broken, and the ones barely holding on. It's for you. So as we continue this journey through God's promises, remember this. You were never meant to flap your wings endlessly in exhaustion. You were meant to soar. And when you place your hope in Him, you'll find a strength that doesn't fade, an endurance that doesn't fail, and a peace that carries you through every storm. Number 3, Romans chapter 8, verse 28. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. There are few promises in the Bible as reassuring and yet as challenging as this one. The idea that all things work together for good can feel almost impossible to believe when we're standing in the middle of loss, disappointment, or confusion. When life feels chaotic and nothing seems to make sense, these words can either feel like a warm embrace or a bitter pill. But let's pause for a moment and really reflect on what this verse is saying. It doesn't say that all things are good. It doesn't deny the reality of pain, suffering, or injustice. Instead, it assures us that God can take even the worst moments of our lives and weave them into something meaningful, something redemptive, something good. Think about a tapestry. From the front, it's a beautiful piece of art, carefully woven with intricate patterns and vibrant colors. But flip it over, and all you see are tangled threads and knots. Life often feels like the backside of that tapestry, messy, confusing, and lacking any clear pattern. But God, the master weaver, sees the full picture. He's not just reacting to our circumstances. He's actively working in them, through them, and sometimes even despite them. Take Joseph, for example. In the book of Genesis, Joseph was betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and imprisoned. From the outside, his life looked like a series of tragic events. But behind the scenes, God was at work. Years later, Joseph rose to a position of power in Egypt, saving countless lives, including those of his brothers, from famine. When Joseph finally confronted them, he said something extraordinary. "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Genesis 50:20. Joseph's story isn't just an ancient tale. It's a reminder that our struggles, setbacks, and seasons of suffering are not wasted. God doesn't allow pain without purpose. Every tear, every closed door, and every unanswered prayer is being woven into a story far greater than we can see right now. But here's the part we often miss. This promise is for those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. It's not a blanket guarantee for everyone. It's an intimate assurance for those who have placed their trust in God, who are walking in relationship with Him, and who have surrendered their lives to His purpose. So let me ask you, are you living according to His purpose? Are you trusting Him with the broken pieces of your story? Sometimes trusting this promise means releasing our need for immediate answers. It means being okay with not understanding everything right now. And that's hard, isn't it? We want to know why this happened, why it had to hurt so much, why God didn't intervene sooner. But faith doesn't always come with answers. It comes with assurance. The assurance that even in the silence, even in the waiting, even in the heartbreak, God is still working. Let me share a story about a man named Mark. Mark had built a thriving business, one that provided for his family and gave him a sense of purpose. But out of nowhere, things began to fall apart. Contracts were lost, debts piled up, and the business he had poured his life into crumbled before his eyes. Mark was devastated. He felt abandoned by God and questioned whether he had misheard God's direction all along. But in the months that followed, something unexpected happened. With his business gone, Mark found himself spending more time with his family, rebuilding broken relationships, and rediscovering his passion for mentoring young entrepreneurs. Eventually, he started a new venture, one that wasn't just about profit, but about purpose. Looking back, Mark realized that losing his first business wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of something far greater. The truth is, we often can't see the good while we're still in the middle of the mess. But hindsight reveals what faith had to trust all along. God was working, and He's working in your life too. Whatever season you find yourself in, whether it's one of abundance or scarcity, clarity or confusion, this promise remains unshaken. God is weaving every detail into something beautiful, something purposeful, something eternally good. Take a moment and reflect. Where in your life do you need to trust that God is still working? What area feels like a tangled mess, but you're willing to place it in His hands? This promise isn't about having all the answers. It's about having unwavering trust in the one who holds them. When you can't see the way forward, when the threads of your story feel frayed and broken, remember this: He's still weaving, He's still working, and one day you'll see the masterpiece He was creating all along. Number 4, Philippians chapter 4, verse 19. And my God will meet all your needs according to the riches of His glory in Christ Jesus. Take a moment and let those words settle in your heart. All your needs, not just some of them, not just the ones that seem small enough for God to handle, not just the ones you think you deserve to have met, all of them. This promise is not just about financial provision or physical needs. It's about every aspect of your life. It's about your emotional needs, your spiritual needs, your need for purpose, your need for healing, your need for peace. This verse is a declaration from God Himself. I will take care of you. But if we're honest, it's not always easy to believe this promise, is it? Because in our human experience, we've faced lack. We've felt the sting of unmet expectations, unanswered prayers, and empty spaces in our lives where we desperately needed God to show up. And sometimes, when those needs linger longer than we expected, doubt begins to creep in. The Apostle Paul wrote these words to the Philippians while he was imprisoned. He wasn't writing from a place of abundance or comfort. He was writing from a cold prison cell with chains on his wrists and uncertainty about his future. Yet, even in those circumstances, Paul declared with unshakable confidence that God would meet all their needs. How could he say that with such certainty? Because Paul had experienced it firsthand. He had seen God provide in the most unexpected ways, in the most desperate situations. He had learned to trust not in his circumstances, but in the unchanging character of God. There's an important distinction here. God promises to meet our needs, not necessarily our wants. And sometimes, what we think we need isn't what God knows is best for us. We might ask for more money, but God gives us contentment. We might ask for a specific outcome, but God gives us peace in the waiting. We might ask for a door to open, but God redirects us to something far greater. Let me tell you about Rachel. Rachel was a single mother, working 2 jobs to make ends meet. Every month she would barely scrape by, and every month she would pray, God, please provide for my family. One particular month, things were worse than usual. Bills piled up, her car broke down, and she felt utterly defeated. But then something happened. A neighbor, who barely knew her, showed up at her door with groceries. A friend offered to give her rides to work until her car was fixed. And at the end of that month, somehow, miraculously, every bill was paid. Rachel didn't win the lottery. She didn't receive a life-changing financial windfall, but her needs were met. God showed up in ways she didn't expect, through people she didn't anticipate, at a time she needed Him most. This is how God often works. His provision isn't always flashy or dramatic, but it's always enough. And more importantly, it's always timely. God doesn't just provide randomly, He provides perfectly. But there's another layer to this promise that we can't overlook. The verse says that God will meet our needs according to the riches of His glory in Christ Jesus. Think about that for a moment. God doesn't provide according to our resources or according to earthly resources, but according to His riches. And God's riches are limitless. They don't run out. They're not subject to market crashes, inflation, or scarcity. So why do we still worry? Why do we still live in fear of not having enough? Because trusting God with our needs requires surrender. It requires letting go of our desire to control, to plan every detail, to secure our future on our own terms. It's easy to trust God when the bank account is full and everything is going according to plan. But true faith is built in the moments of uncertainty, when we don't see a way forward, yet we still choose to believe that God will make one. Take a moment and think about the needs in your life right now. What are you holding tightly in your hands, afraid to let go of? Is it a financial worry, a relationship, a dream you've been chasing? Whatever it is, know this: God sees it, God knows it, and God is already working on it. This promise isn't about a life of luxury or constant comfort. It's about trust. Trust that the God who created the heavens and the earth, who knows the number of hairs on your head, who sent His Son to die for you, that same God will meet your every need. As you walk through this season of your life, let these words echo in your heart. And my God will meet all your needs according to the riches of His glory in Christ Jesus. Not because of who you are, but because of who He is. Not because you've earned it, but because He's promised it. And if there's one thing we can be sure of, it's this: God always keeps His promises. Number 5, Psalm chapter 23, verse 1. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. These are perhaps some of the most comforting words ever written. In just a few short words, King David captures the essence of trust, provision, and unwavering security in God. But if we're honest, I shall not want feels far from reality in our modern world, doesn't it? We live in an age defined by wanting more money, more success, more recognition, more security. And yet David boldly declares, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." To truly understand the power of this promise, we need to understand the role of a shepherd. In ancient times, a shepherd wasn't just a caretaker of sheep. He was their guide, their protector, and their provider. Sheep are vulnerable animals. They can't defend themselves, they get lost easily, and they depend entirely on the shepherd for food, water, and safety. And yet, sheep don't worry. They simply follow the shepherd's voice, trusting him to meet their every need. David wasn't just writing poetry here, he was writing from experience. Before he was a king, David was a shepherd. He knew the long nights spent watching over the flock, the moments of danger when wild animals approached, and the relentless dedication it took to care for every single sheep. And David looked at his own life, his victories, his failures, his seasons of plenty and his seasons of lack, and he realized something profound. God was his shepherd. But here's the thing, if God is our shepherd, that means we must embrace our role as sheep. And that's not always easy for us, is it? Sheep aren't known for their independence or strength. They're not majestic or powerful animals. They're entirely dependent on their shepherd. And dependence, true dependence, goes against everything our culture tells us. We're taught to be self-sufficient, to handle things on our own, to rely on our strength and our resources. But David is reminding us of something deeply countercultural. True peace comes from surrender. True security comes from following the shepherd. Let me tell you about Michael. Michael was a successful executive at a major company. From the outside, his life looked perfect. He had the salary, the status, the lifestyle. But inside, he was crumbling. Anxiety kept him awake at night. Fear of failure consumed him, and no matter how much he achieved, it was never enough. One night, after weeks of relentless stress, Michael opened his Bible and stumbled upon this verse: "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." For the first time, he realized he had been living like a sheep without a shepherd, trying to navigate life on his own, carrying burdens he was never meant to carry. That night, Michael made a choice. He surrendered. He let go of the illusion of control and began to trust God as his shepherd. And here's the incredible thing. Michael's circumstances didn't immediately change. His workload didn't disappear, and his responsibilities didn't vanish. But something inside him shifted. The weight he had been carrying was replaced by peace. The anxiety that had gripped his heart was replaced by trust, because he finally understood this truth. If the Lord is your shepherd, you lack nothing. You see, God doesn't promise to give us everything we want, but He does promise to provide everything we need. Sometimes what we think we need is very different from what God knows we need. We might ask for success, but God gives us humility. We might ask for wealth, but God gives us contentment. We might ask for answers, but God gives us peace. This promise isn't about living a life free from hardship. It's about living a life free from fear. Because when the Lord is your shepherd, you can rest in the assurance that you are seen, known, and cared for by the one who holds the universe in his hands. And right now, as we reflect on this promise, I want to invite you to take your commitment a step further. By clicking the join button below, you'll become part of a community dedicated to diving deeper into these truths, supporting one another, and growing together in faith. As a member, you'll gain access to exclusive content, deeper reflections, and a space where you can ask questions, share your journey, and truly connect. This isn't just about content, it's about community. Think about it. When sheep are together under the care of a shepherd, they're safer, stronger, and more at peace. And that's what this community is all about. Walking together, trusting the shepherd, and reminding one another of his promises. Take a moment and ask yourself, am I truly living as though the Lord is my shepherd? Am I trusting him with every area of my life, or am I still holding on to control? This promise is more than just comforting words. It's an invitation to let go of fear, to surrender your burdens, and to follow the voice of the shepherd. And when you do, you'll discover something extraordinary. You shall not want, because in him you already have everything you need. Number 6, John chapter 14, verse 27. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. Peace. Such a small word, yet it carries so much weight. In a world filled with noise, deadlines, financial pressures, uncertainty, and conflict, peace feels like a distant dream, something we long for but rarely experience. But here, in these words spoken by Jesus himself, we're given a promise unlike any other. My peace I give you. Notice something important. Jesus isn't offering just any kind of peace. He's not talking about a fleeting moment of calm or the temporary relief that comes from escaping our problems for a while. He's talking about his peace, a peace that surpasses all understanding, a peace that remains steady even when the world around us is falling apart. But if this peace has been given to us, why do so many of us still live with hearts full of anxiety and minds clouded by fear? The answer is simple, yet profound. We often look for peace in the wrong places. We search for it in achievements, relationships, financial security, or temporary escapes. And while those things might bring momentary relief, they can never offer the deep, unshakable peace that Jesus promises. Imagine being on a boat in the middle of a storm. The waves are crashing, the wind is howling, and fear grips everyone on board. That's exactly what happened to the disciples in Mark chapter 4. They were in a boat with Jesus when a violent storm arose. The waves were so intense that the boat began to fill with water. And where was Jesus? Asleep on a cushion. In their panic, the disciples woke him up and cried out, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" Jesus got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." And in an instant the storm stopped and everything was calm. But here's the most powerful part of that story. Jesus wasn't just calming the storm around them. He was revealing the peace within him. The same peace that allowed him to sleep through a violent storm is the peace he promises to give to us. You see, the peace of Jesus isn't dependent on circumstances. It's not shaken by storms, nor does it crumble under pressure. It's an anchor for our souls, holding us steady in the middle of chaos. But peace isn't passive. It requires trust. It requires us to believe that God is in control, even when life feels uncontrollable. It requires us to surrender our fears, our doubts, and our desperate attempts to control everything around us. Let me tell you about Elena. She was a nurse who worked long hours in a high-pressure hospital ward. Every day, she was surrounded by suffering, uncertainty, and sometimes even loss. Over time, the weight of it all started to take a toll on her. She couldn't sleep, her chest felt tight with anxiety, and she began to question whether she could keep going. One evening, during a rare, quiet moment in the hospital chapel, Eleanor opened her Bible and read this verse, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you." In that moment, she realized something profound. She had been carrying burdens she was never meant to carry alone. That night, Eleanor made a decision. Before every shift, she would sit quietly, close her eyes and pray, "Jesus, fill me with your peace. Let me walk through today anchored in your presence." Her circumstances didn't change. The hospital was still chaotic, the demands were still relentless. But something inside her shifted. The storm was still raging, but her heart was calm. This is the kind of peace Jesus offers us, not the absence of problems, but the presence of God in the midst of them. So let me ask you, where are you searching for peace? Is it in your job, your finances, your relationships? Or are you anchored in the peace that Jesus offers? Peace isn't something we stumble upon accidentally. It's something we receive intentionally. It's a gift, freely given, but we have to make the choice to accept it and live in it. When Jesus says, "Do not let your hearts be troubled and do not be afraid," He's not giving us an impossible command. He's inviting us into a new way of living, a life where fear doesn't dictate our decisions, where anxiety doesn't control our thoughts, and where the storms of life don't steal our joy. Imagine waking up tomorrow with a heart completely at peace, not because your problems have disappeared, but because you know that the one who commands the winds and waves is holding you securely in his hands. This promise isn't a distant hope. It's available to you right now, a peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, a peace that doesn't fade with time, and a peace that can quiet even the loudest storms in your life. Jesus said it best, "My peace I give you." It's not a fragile peace, it's not a temporary peace, it's a divine peace, and it's yours to hold on to. Number 7, Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 to 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. Trust, such a simple word, yet one of the hardest actions to live out. To trust means to let go, to surrender control, to believe that someone else knows better than you. And when it comes to trusting God, it often means walking forward when you can't see the full path ahead, believing in his promises when circumstances seem to scream the opposite, and holding on when everything inside you wants to let go. This verse from Proverbs doesn't just suggest trust, it commands it. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, not with part of your heart, not with the areas that feel easy to let go of, but with all your heart. And then it gives us a warning. Lean not on your own understanding. Here's where most of us stumble. We like to trust God, but only up to the point where it makes sense to us. We want to see the blueprint, the next 3 steps, the safety net waiting below. But faith doesn't work like that. Faith requires us to step out even when we don't understand, even when the answers aren't clear, even when the road seems uncertain. Think about Abraham. In the book of Genesis, God called Abraham to leave his home, his family, and everything familiar to go to a land God would show him. Not a land God had already shown him, but a land God would show him. Abraham wasn't given a map, he was given a promise. And yet Abraham obeyed. He packed up his life and walked forward into the unknown, trusting not in the plan, but in the one who gave the plan. That's the kind of trust Proverbs 3:5-6 is talking about. A trust that says, God, I may not understand this, but I trust you anyway. I may not see the full picture, but I know you do. But let's be honest, trusting God is easier said than done. Life has a way of shaking our confidence, of making us question whether God really sees us, really knows us, really cares. Maybe you've been praying for something for years and haven't seen an answer. Maybe you're facing a situation right now where every logical thought is telling you to give up. Maybe you're standing at a crossroads and the fear of making the wrong choice is paralyzing you. Let me tell you about Daniel. Daniel had always been a planner. He mapped out every detail of his life, his career, his finances, his family goals. But then, out of nowhere, he lost his job. His carefully crafted plans unraveled before his eyes, and he found himself standing in the middle of uncertainty. For weeks, Daniel wrestled with fear and frustration. He kept asking God, why? Why now? Why me? But then, in a quiet moment of prayer, Daniel read this verse. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. That night, Daniel made a decision. He would stop trying to control every outcome and start trusting God with every detail. He began applying for jobs, not in panic, but in faith. And in time, a door opened, one he hadn't even considered before. A job that wasn't just about income, but about impact. Looking back, Daniel realized that losing his previous job wasn't a punishment, it was a redirection. You see, trusting God doesn't mean the road will always be smooth, but it does mean that the road will lead somewhere meaningful. When we submit our paths to Him, as Proverbs 3:6 says, He will make them straight. It might not happen overnight and it might not happen the way we expect, but it will happen. But notice something. The promise comes after the trust. God doesn't say, I'll make your paths straight and then you can trust me. No, He says, trust me first, lean on me first, submit to me first, and then I will guide you. So what does this look like in your daily life? It means praying even when you don't see results. It means stepping out in faith even when the outcome isn't guaranteed. It means choosing obedience over convenience and faith over fear. Think about your own life for a moment. Where is God asking you to trust Him right now? Maybe it's in your career, your relationships, your finances, or your health. Maybe it's in an area so personal that you've been afraid to even speak it out loud. Whatever it is, know this: God sees you. He knows the weight you're carrying, and He's inviting you to lay it down at His feet and trust Him with the outcome. Trust isn't about having all the answers. It's about knowing the one who does. It's about walking in faith, one step at a time, even when the road ahead is unclear. The promise of Proverbs 3:5-6 isn't just ancient wisdom, it's a lifeline. And it's not just for Abraham or Daniel or the countless others who've walked this path before us. It's for you, right here, right now. So as you continue forward, carry these words with you. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight. Because when you trust Him, really trust Him, you'll discover that even the most uncertain roads can lead to the most extraordinary destinations. Number 8, Matthew chapter 6, verse 33. But seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. It's a simple instruction, yet it carries profound weight. Seek first. Not second, not when it's convenient, not after everything else is in order. First. Jesus is giving us a divine principle, one that challenges the very rhythm of our modern lives. We live in a world that glorifies hustle, ambition, and self-reliance. From a young age, we're taught to chase success, accumulate wealth, and secure our future. And while those things aren't inherently wrong, Jesus is reminding us that when our priorities are out of alignment, everything else begins to fall apart. The context of this verse is powerful. Jesus had just been teaching about worry over food, clothing, and the basic needs of life. He wasn't speaking to the rich or the privileged. He was speaking to ordinary people with real fears and daily struggles. And yet, in the middle of those concerns, Jesus says, "Seek first the kingdom of God." But what does it actually mean to seek first his kingdom? It means putting God at the center of every decision, every plan, and every priority. It means surrendering our personal agendas and asking, "God, what do you want? How can I honor you in this situation? What does your will look like in my life?" It's about alignment. When our hearts are aligned with God's kingdom, everything else begins to fall into place. Not always perfectly, not always in the way we expect, but always in the way that matters most. Let me share a story about Lucas. Lucas was an ambitious young man with big dreams of building a successful business. He worked tirelessly, often sacrificing sleep, time with his family, and even his health in pursuit of his goals. But no matter how hard he worked, it felt like he was always falling short, always one step away from the breakthrough he was chasing. One evening, after another long and frustrating day, Lucas opened his Bible and read this verse. "But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well." Something shifted in his heart. He realized that his life was out of balance. His career had become his kingdom. His success had become his God, and everything else, including his relationship with God, had taken a back seat. That night, Lucas made a decision. He began to start every day with prayer and time in God's Word. He made space in his schedule for his family and prioritized serving in his local church. And here's the incredible thing. His business didn't fall apart. In fact, it began to grow, slowly, steadily, and with a sense of peace he had never experienced before. Lucas discovered a powerful truth. When you put God first, everything else finds its proper place. But let's be clear. This verse isn't a formula for material success. It's not a guarantee that if you seek God first, you'll get rich, or your life will suddenly become problem-free. What it promises is something far more valuable: alignment with God's will, peace in your spirit, and provision for your needs. Jesus is inviting us to shift our focus from chasing after things to chasing after Him, because when our hearts are aligned with His kingdom, our desires begin to change. We stop obsessing over what we lack and start trusting in God's ability to provide. Think about your own life for a moment. What are you seeking first right now? Is it your career, your financial security, approval from others, or is it God's kingdom and His righteousness? Here's the thing. Whatever you seek first will shape everything else in your life. If you seek success first, your identity will be tied to your achievements. If you seek approval first, your happiness will depend on the opinions of others. But if you seek God first, everything else will be filtered through His love, His wisdom, and His perfect timing. Seeking God's kingdom isn't about perfection, it's about priority. It's about waking up every day and saying, "God, today I choose you. Today I seek your will above my own. Today I trust that as I follow you, everything else will fall into place." This promise isn't just for the spiritually elite or the extraordinarily disciplined. It's for you. It's for the parent balancing work and family. It's for the student overwhelmed by deadlines. It's for the person facing an uncertain future. It's for anyone who's tired of chasing after things that never truly satisfy. When Jesus said, "All these things will be given to you as well," He wasn't offering us a life free from challenges. He was offering us a life anchored in trust, a life where our needs are met, not always according to our timeline, but always according to His perfect plan. Take a moment to reflect. What does seeking God's kingdom first look like in your life? Are there areas where your priorities need realignment? The beauty of this promise is that it's not a one-time decision. It's a daily choice. Every morning, every moment, we have the opportunity to seek Him first. And when we do, we'll discover a life marked not by striving, but by peace, not by scarcity, but by trust. Because when God is first, everything else falls into place. Not always the way we want, but always the way we need. Number 9, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9. But He said to me, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me." Weakness. It's a word we don't like to associate with ourselves. In a world that celebrates strength, independence, and self-reliance, admitting weakness feels like failure. We hide our struggles, mask our fears, and try to convince everyone around us and ourselves that we have it all together. But here, in this verse, we find one of the most profound promises in all of Scripture. God's grace is sufficient, and His power is made perfect in our weakness. These words were spoken to the Apostle Paul during one of the most vulnerable moments of his life. Paul had been given a thorn in the flesh, a persistent struggle, an ongoing burden that he pleaded with God to take away. 3 times Paul begged God to remove it, and 3 times God said no. But instead of removing the thorn, God gave Paul something even greater, His grace. We don't know exactly what Paul's thorn was. Some believe it was a physical ailment, others suggest it might have been an emotional or spiritual burden. But in many ways, the specific nature of the thorn doesn't matter. Because we all have our own thorns, don't we? Areas of our lives where we feel inadequate, weak, or vulnerable. It might be a chronic illness, a broken relationship, a recurring fear, or a failure that haunts us. Whatever it is, we've all been there, crying out to God, asking Him to take it away. And sometimes God does. Sometimes He brings healing, restoration, or resolution. But other times, He answers the way He answered Paul. "My grace is sufficient for you." This promise isn't about God removing every struggle. It's about God stepping into our struggles and filling the gaps with His grace. His grace doesn't just help us endure our weakness, it transforms our weakness into a platform for His power. Think about it. If Paul had been strong enough to handle everything on his own, he wouldn't have needed God's grace. If you and I were capable of carrying every burden, solving every problem, and overcoming every struggle in our own strength, we would have no need for God. But it's in those moments of weakness, when we come to the end of ourselves, when we have nothing left to give, that God's power shines the brightest, because it's no longer about what we can do, it's about what He can do through us. Let me tell you about Maria. Maria had always been the strong one in her family. She held everything together, supported everyone around her, and never let anyone see her break. But then, life hit her with a series of devastating blows. A health crisis, financial struggles, and the loss of someone she loved deeply. Maria tried to stay strong, to hold it all together, but eventually she reached her breaking point. One night, sitting in her room with tears streaming down her face, she whispered a prayer. "God, I can't do this anymore." And in that quiet moment, Maria felt something shift, not her circumstances. They remained the same, but her heart. For the first time, she realized that she didn't have to be strong on her own. God's grace was enough. His strength would carry her where her own strength had failed. Over time, Maria began to see how God was working through her weakness. Her vulnerability allowed her to connect with others in ways she never had before. Her dependence on God deepened her faith. And in the middle of her struggles, God's power was on full display. This is what Paul meant when he said, "I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me." Paul wasn't celebrating his struggles. He was celebrating what God could do through his struggles. You see, weakness isn't a flaw to be hidden. It's an opportunity to experience God's strength. It's in our most fragile moments that His grace becomes most evident. But let's be honest, embracing our weakness doesn't come naturally. We want to fix, to control, to overcome. But sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply admit, God, I can't do this without you. Think about your own life. Where do you feel weak right now? Where do you feel like you've reached the end of your strength? Maybe it's in your family, your job, your health, or your faith. Whatever it is, know this: God's grace is sufficient for you. His grace doesn't run out. It doesn't fade over time. It's not reserved for the worthy or the strong. It's available to you right now in this moment. Paul's weakness didn't disqualify him from being used by God. It became the very thing God used to display His glory. And the same can be true for you. So as you face your struggles, your burdens, and your thorns, remember this: you don't have to be strong enough. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to pretend to be okay. Because God's grace is enough, and His power is made perfect in your weakness. When you embrace this promise, you'll begin to see your struggles not as obstacles, but as opportunities. Opportunities for God to step in, to shine through, and to remind you that His grace is not just sufficient, it's abundant. Number 10, Psalm chapter 46, verse 10. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. Stillness. It's almost a foreign concept in our modern world. We live in constant motion, our schedules overflowing, our minds racing, our hearts burdened with endless worries and distractions. Silence feels uncomfortable, and stillness seems unproductive. But here, in this verse, God is not making a suggestion, He's giving a command. Be still. It's not just about physical stillness, it's about a posture of the heart. It's about learning to quiet the noise of the world, the chaos of our thoughts, and the weight of our worries, so we can truly know, deeply, intimately, that He is God. But why is this so hard for us? Because stillness requires trust. It requires us to stop striving, stop fixing, stop trying to control everything, and simply trust that God is who He says He is. And that's terrifying for most of us. We're wired to act, to solve, to move. But God says, stop, be still, let me be God. Think about it. When we're faced with challenges, our first instinct is often to jump into action. We want to fix the problem, change the situation, and find a solution. But sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is simply stop, breathe, and remember who's really in control. In the Bible, the Israelites faced moments where stillness was their only option. In Exodus, as they stood trapped between the Red Sea and Pharaoh's advancing army, fear gripped their hearts. But Moses spoke these powerful words: "The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Exodus 14:14. And what happened? God parted the waters, made a way where there was no way, and delivered His people in a miraculous display of power. But let's be honest, being still in moments of fear and uncertainty feels almost impossible. It feels passive, almost irresponsible. But stillness isn't passivity, it's an act of faith. It's choosing to surrender control and say, God, I trust you. Even when I don't understand, even when I can't see the way forward, even when everything in me wants to run or fight or fix, I will be still. Let me share a story with you about a man named Thomas. Thomas was a business owner who had poured his heart and soul into building his company. But then, out of nowhere, the business began to crumble. Contracts fell through, clients disappeared, and debts began to pile up. Every night, Thomas lay awake, his mind racing with plans, strategies, and worst-case scenarios. One Sunday morning, he sat in church, exhausted and desperate. The pastor read this verse: "Be still and know that I am God." In that moment, Thomas realized he had been trying to carry a burden he was never meant to carry alone. He had been striving, pushing, and fighting, but he had never stopped to be still. That afternoon, Thomas went home, sat in his living room, and prayed a simple prayer. God, I can't do this anymore. I surrender this business to you. I will trust you, no matter what happens. In the weeks that followed, Thomas didn't stop working. But something had changed. The frantic anxiety that had been consuming him began to fade. He made decisions with clarity instead of panic. And slowly, opportunities began to emerge. Doors opened, partnerships formed, and the business began to recover. But the real miracle wasn't in the recovery of Thomas's business. It was in the transformation of his heart. He learned that stillness isn't about doing nothing. It's about doing the right thing, trusting God completely. This verse is an invitation, a gentle but firm call from God to stop striving and start trusting. It's in the stillness that we're reminded of who God is, sovereign, powerful, loving, and in control. But stillness doesn't just happen. It's something we must intentionally create space for in our lives. It might mean waking up a little earlier to spend time in prayer. It might mean turning off the noise, your phone, your emails, your notifications, and just sitting quietly in God's presence. It's in those moments of stillness that God speaks. It's in the quiet that we hear His whispers of peace, His reminders of love, and His gentle nudges toward the path He set before us. Take a moment and ask yourself, when was the last time I was truly still before God? When was the last time I stopped striving, stopped worrying, and simply trusted Him? This isn't about having all the answers or pretending everything is fine. It's about letting go. It's about recognizing that no amount of striving, worrying, or overthinking will accomplish what God can do with one word, one moment, one divine intervention. When God says, "Be still and know that I am God," He's not asking for perfection. He's asking for surrender. Imagine a child who's scared in the middle of a storm. They don't try to fix the storm or understand the storm or control the storm. They simply run into their parents' arms, bury their face in their chest, and let their presence bring comfort. That's what God is inviting us to do, to stop running, stop panicking, stop trying to control the uncontrollable, and just run to Him. Because when we're still before God, something extraordinary happens. Our fears begin to fade, our perspective begins to shift, and our hearts find rest. This isn't just a suggestion, it's a lifeline. And when you embrace it, you'll discover that stillness isn't weakness, it's the deepest expression of trust. So, slow down, breathe, be still, and really know, that He is God. Number 11, Isaiah chapter 41 verse 10. So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Fear, it's a shadow that follows us all. It shows up in the dead of night when our thoughts won't let us sleep, in moments of uncertainty when the future feels unclear, and in seasons of loss when we wonder if we'll ever feel whole again. Fear whispers lies. You're alone. You're not strong enough. You'll never make it through this. But here in this verse from Isaiah, God speaks louder than fear. He declares a promise that shatters every lie. Do not fear, for I am with you. These are not empty words. They are the unshakable truth spoken by the Creator of the universe. Notice how God doesn't just tell us not to fear. He gives us a reason, for I am with you. The antidote to fear isn't courage, it's presence. It's knowing that we are not alone, that God is standing with us in every battle, every storm, every uncertain moment. But let's be honest, fear feels powerful, doesn't it? It grips our hearts, clouds our judgment, and keeps us from moving forward. And yet over and over again the Bible commands us, do not fear, not because fear isn't real, but because God is greater. This verse goes even further. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. God isn't just with us as a passive observer. He's actively strengthening us, helping us, and holding us up. Imagine a father walking with his small child across a slippery path. The child might stumble, might lose their footing, but as long as the father holds their hand, they will not fall. That's the image God gives us here, His righteous right hand holding us firmly, refusing to let us fall. Let me share with you the story of Anna. Anna was diagnosed with a life-altering illness. The news came suddenly, and her world felt like it was collapsing. Fear gripped her heart, fear of the unknown, fear of pain, fear of leaving her family behind. One evening, as she sat in the quiet of her living room, she opened her Bible and her eyes landed on this verse: "Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God." Tears began to stream down her face. For the first time since her diagnosis, she realized she wasn't fighting this battle alone. Anna made a choice that night, a choice to trust. Day by day, moment by moment, she clung to God's promise. And though her circumstances didn't immediately change, her heart did. Fear began to loosen its grip, and peace started to take its place. You see, fear loses its power when we recognize God's presence. It doesn't mean the storm disappears, but it means we face the storm with the unshakable assurance that we are not alone. But here's something important. Overcoming fear isn't a one-time decision. It's a daily choice. Every morning, we must remind ourselves, God is with me. God will strengthen me. God will hold me. Fear thrives in the unknown, but faith thrives in the presence of God. Think about your own life. What are you afraid of right now? Is it financial instability, a health crisis, a broken relationship, or an uncertain future? Whatever it is, know this: God is not distant from your fear. He's standing right beside you in it. Fear often feels like an immovable wall, but God's promise is bigger than any wall you'll ever face. He's not asking you to pretend you're not afraid. He's asking you to trust Him despite your fear. The most beautiful part of this promise is in the action verbs God uses. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you. These aren't passive statements. They're active commitments from God to you. When God says He will strengthen you, it means He'll give you what you need, exactly when you need it. When He says He will help you, it means He's not just watching from afar. He's right there in the struggle with you. And when He says He will uphold you, it means He will not let you fall, no matter how weak you feel. Take a moment and ask yourself, where do I need God's strength right now? What area of my life feels too heavy to carry on my own? Maybe it's time to let go of the weight you've been holding on to and allow God to carry it for you. Maybe it's time to stop trying to face your fears alone and start leaning into the strength of His righteous right hand. Fear will always try to have a voice in your life, but it doesn't have to have the final word, because the final word belongs to God, and His word says, "Do not fear, for I am with you." When we truly believe this promise, something shifts inside us. Fear may still knock at the door, but it no longer gets to stay. Anxiety may still whisper, but it no longer gets to shout. Because we know, deep in our souls, that God is with us, God is for us, and God will never let us go. So, when fear tries to grip your heart, when the storm feels too strong, remember these words: "Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." Let this promise be the anchor that holds you steady. Let it remind you over and over again that you are never alone. Number 12, Romans chapter 15, verse 13. May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in Him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. Hope. It's a word we often throw around casually. I hope it doesn't rain tomorrow. I hope things get better soon. I hope this works out. But the kind of hope Paul is talking about in this verse isn't fragile or fleeting. It's not dependent on circumstances or wishful thinking. This is a living hope anchored in the character and promises of God. Notice how Paul describes God, the God of hope. Hope isn't just something God gives, it's who He is. His very nature is hope, and everything He does flows from that essence. When we place our trust in Him, we're not clinging to an uncertain wish, we're holding on to an unshakable reality. But here's the key: hope doesn't grow in isolation. Paul tells us that joy and peace are tied to trust. As we trust in God, step by step, day by day, He fills us with joy and peace, and that joy and peace give birth to an overflow of hope. The imagery Paul uses here is beautiful. Overflow with hope. Not a tiny trickle of hope, not barely enough to get by. Overflow. Imagine a cup being filled with water, not stopping when it's full, but continuing to pour until it spills over the edges. That's the kind of hope God wants to give us. Not just enough for ourselves, but so much that it spills out into the lives of others. But if we're honest, many of us don't feel like we're overflowing with hope. In fact, there are moments when hope feels like an impossible thing to hold on to. Maybe you've been praying for something for years and haven't seen an answer. Maybe life has hit you with one disappointment after another, and your hope feels more like a flickering candle than an overflowing cup. Let me share a story with you about Sarah. Sarah was going through one of the darkest seasons of her life. Her marriage was falling apart, her health was declining, and her finances were in shambles. Every day felt like an uphill battle, and hope was a word she could barely whisper. One evening, a friend invited Sarah to a small Bible study group. Reluctantly, she went. That night, someone read this verse from Romans: "May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him." Something shifted in Sarah's heart. She realized that she had been trying to manufacture hope on her own, trying to force herself to feel optimistic, trying to ignore her fears. But hope doesn't come from us, it comes from God. That night, Sarah prayed a simple prayer: "God, I can't do this on my own. Fill me with your hope." Over the next few months, Sarah's circumstances didn't change overnight, but her heart did. Slowly, day by day, as she leaned into God's presence and trusted his promises, she began to experience something miraculous: joy in the middle of pain, peace in the middle of uncertainty, and hope in the middle of darkness. You see, the hope God gives isn't tied to circumstances. It's not fragile or fleeting. It's not dependent on everything working out the way we want. It's rooted in something much deeper, God's unchanging character and his faithful promises. But this hope isn't passive. It requires trust. Paul says, "As you trust in him." Trust is the bridge between our brokenness and God's overflowing hope. It's the daily choice to say, "God, I don't see the way forward, but I trust you. I don't understand this season, but I trust you. I don't feel hopeful right now, but I trust you to fill me with your hope." And when we make that choice, when we anchor our trust in God rather than in our circumstances, something incredible happens. Joy begins to grow, even in the middle of hardship. Peace begins to settle, even in the middle of chaos. And hope begins to overflow, not because of what we see, but because of who God is. Think about your own life for a moment. Where do you need hope right now? What area of your life feels dry, empty, or broken? Maybe it's your family, your health, your career, or your faith itself. Whatever it is, know this: God is the source of hope. You don't have to manufacture it on your own. You don't have to pretend to be okay when you're not. You don't have to force yourself to feel hopeful when everything feels hopeless. You simply have to trust. And here's the beautiful part. When you trust God, hope doesn't just stay inside you. It overflows. It spills into your relationships, your conversations, your prayers, and your actions. It becomes a light in the darkness, not just for you, but for everyone around you. This promise from Romans 15:13 isn't just a nice sentiment, it's a lifeline. It's an invitation to let go of self-reliance, to release your fears, and to place your trust in the God of hope. Take a deep breath and reflect on these words. May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. Let this promise sink deep into your heart. Let it remind you that your hope isn't dependent on what you see, but on who God is. Because when God is your source of hope, you'll discover something extraordinary, even in the darkest moments, even in the hardest seasons, even when everything feels uncertain, hope will overflow. Number 13, 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7. Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. Anxiety. It's a word that carries weight, a heavy burden that so many of us carry silently. It creeps into our thoughts, keeps us awake at night and fills our hearts with restlessness. Sometimes it's tied to specific worries, financial struggles, health concerns, relationship challenges. Other times, it's a vague cloud that hangs over us, an unease we can't quite explain. But here, in this verse, Peter gives us a simple yet profound instruction. Cast all your anxiety on him. Notice the word all. Not just the big worries, not just the ones you think are spiritual enough to bring before God, but all of them. The small worries, the nagging thoughts, the fears you don't even want to admit out loud. And why can we do this? Why should we? Because, as Peter reminds us, he cares for you. Let those words sink in. God cares for you, not in a distant, detached way, but in a deeply personal, intimate way. He sees every tear, hears every unspoken fear, and understands every burden you carry. But let's be honest, casting our anxiety on God isn't always easy. Sometimes we treat our worries like precious treasures, holding onto them tightly, as if our anxiety itself gives us some sense of control. Other times, we bring our worries to God in prayer, but then we pick them right back up again as soon as we say Amen. The word cast here is significant. It's not gentle or passive. It's active. It's deliberate. It's the image of someone taking a heavy bag and throwing it off their shoulders, knowing they can't carry it any longer. That's what God invites us to do with our anxiety, to throw it onto Him. Imagine someone hiking up a steep mountain, carrying an enormous backpack filled with heavy stones. Every step is exhausting, every breath is labored. But then they meet someone who says, "Give me your backpack, I'll carry it for you." At first, they hesitate. It's their bag, their weight. But eventually, they hand it over, and suddenly they're free. Their shoulders relax, their steps become lighter, and they can finally breathe deeply again. That's the invitation God gives us. He's saying, you don't have to carry this on your own. Hand it over to me. But how do we actually do this? How do we cast our anxiety on Him in a practical, real way? First, we need to acknowledge our anxiety. Pretending it's not there doesn't make it go away. God isn't asking us to suppress our worries. He's asking us to bring them to Him. Second, we need to pray with honesty and vulnerability. Talk to God about your fears, your worries, and your struggles. Don't hold back. He already knows what's in your heart, but there's something powerful about speaking it out loud, about laying it at His feet. Third, we need to trust Him with the outcome. This is the hardest part, isn't it? Trusting that God will handle our worries in His way, in His timing, and according to His wisdom. But here's the truth. God is not only capable of carrying our burdens, He's also trustworthy. Let me tell you about James. James was a father of 3 who had been struggling with overwhelming anxiety about his family's financial situation. Every night he lay awake staring at the ceiling, running numbers in his head and imagining worst-case scenarios. He prayed about it, but he never really let go of the worry. One Sunday morning, his pastor read this verse, "Cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you." For James, it was like hearing those words for the first time. That night, he knelt by his bed and prayed a simple but heartfelt prayer. "God, I can't carry this anymore. I'm giving it to you. Help me to trust you with this burden." The next day, James woke up feeling lighter. His financial problems didn't disappear overnight, but the grip of anxiety on his heart began to loosen. He started each day with prayer, reminding himself of God's care and provision. Over time, he saw God provide in unexpected ways, through a promotion at work, through wise financial counsel, and through small blessings that reminded him that God was in control. James discovered something powerful. The weight of anxiety wasn't his to carry, and the same is true for you. God never intended for you to shoulder your burdens alone. He's inviting you to cast them onto Him, not because you're weak, but because He's strong. But notice one final thing. This verse doesn't promise that God will immediately remove every problem we're anxious about. Instead, it promises us something even better, His care. And when we truly believe that God cares for us, that He's deeply, personally invested in our lives, our hearts can begin to rest, even in the middle of uncertainty. Take a moment and think about the worries you're carrying right now. Picture them as heavy stones in a backpack on your shoulders. Now imagine taking that backpack off, handing it to God, and walking forward without its weight. That's what this promise offers you. Freedom from the crushing weight of anxiety and the deep assurance that you are seen, known, and cared for by a God who holds the universe in His hands and yet still cares about the smallest details of your life. Let these words echo in your heart. Cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you, and as you walk forward, lighter and freer, may you remember this truth. God doesn't just see your anxiety, He invites you to give it to Him. Number 14, Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 8. The Lord Himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. There's a deep reassurance in these words, a promise that feels like a warm light piercing through the darkest night. The Lord Himself goes before you. Think about that for a moment. Before you step into any challenge, any uncertainty, or any new chapter of your life, God is already there. He's not just walking alongside you, He's walking ahead of you, clearing paths, removing obstacles, and preparing the way. This verse wasn't spoken in calm, easy circumstances. It was spoken to the Israelites as they prepared to enter the Promised Land, a land filled with unknowns, challenges, and enemies. Moses, their leader, was passing the torch to Joshua, and the people were facing an uncertain future. Fear and discouragement were natural reactions, but God, through Moses, gave them this promise: do not be afraid, do not be discouraged. Fear and discouragement are two of the most powerful weapons the enemy uses against us. Fear keeps us from stepping forward, and discouragement keeps us from standing firm. But God's promise in this verse speaks directly to both. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Let that sink in. Never. Not sometimes. Not when you've done everything right. Not when life is easy. Never. But let's be honest. There are moments when God feels distant. Moments when the silence feels deafening, when the prayers feel unanswered, and when the darkness seems overwhelming. In those moments, we're tempted to believe the lie that God has left us, that we're walking this path alone. But feelings aren't always facts. Just because we feel alone doesn't mean we are alone. God's promise isn't based on our emotions. It's based on His unchanging character. And His character says, I will never leave you. Think about a parent teaching a child to ride a bike. At first, the parent holds onto the bike, running alongside, keeping it steady. But eventually, they let go. From the child's perspective, it might feel like the parent has disappeared. But if the child stops and looks back, they'll see the parent just a few steps away, ready to catch them if they fall. That's what God does with us. Sometimes it feels like He's let go, like we're wobbling through life on our own, but He's never far. He's still there, watching, guiding, ready to catch us when we stumble. Let me share a story about Samuel. Samuel had been working at the same company for over a decade. His job was stable, his co-workers were like family, and he felt comfortable. But one day, out of nowhere, he was laid off. The days that followed were filled with fear and uncertainty. Samuel wondered, God, where are you? Why did you let this happen? What am I supposed to do now? But one morning, as Samuel was reading his Bible, he came across this verse. The Lord Himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. In that moment, Samuel realized something. God hadn't abandoned him. God was already ahead of him, preparing a new path, opening new doors, and setting up opportunities Samuel couldn't yet see. With renewed faith, Samuel started applying for jobs, not with desperation, but with trust. A few weeks later, he was offered a position at a new company, a role that not only provided financial security, but also aligned with his passions and values in ways his old job never had. Samuel's story reminds us of a powerful truth. God is always ahead of us. He's not surprised by our struggles, and he's not scrambling to come up with a plan. He's already there, waiting for us to catch up to the place he's prepared. But here's the key. We have to keep walking. Fear might tell us to stop. Discouragement might tell us to turn back. But God's voice says, keep going, I'm already there. Take a moment and think about your own life. Where do you feel stuck right now? Where does fear have a grip on your heart? Where is discouragement whispering lies? Maybe it's a new season of life, starting a new job, moving to a new city, navigating a challenging relationship, or stepping into an opportunity you feel unqualified for. Wherever you are, know this: God has already gone before you. When you feel afraid, remind yourself, God is ahead of me. When you feel discouraged, remind yourself, God will never leave me. When you feel uncertain, remind yourself, God has already prepared the way. This promise isn't about having all the answers. It's about trusting the one who does. It's about walking forward, even when the path is unclear, because you know who's waiting at the end. God isn't just ahead of you, he's also with you right now. He's not distant or distracted. He's close, closer than your next breath. So as you face the challenges, uncertainties, and fears of life, carry this verse with you. The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. And when the road feels long and the night feels dark, remember, you're not walking it alone. The God who promised to never leave you is walking every step with you, and he's already waiting at the finish line. Number 15, Joshua chapter 1, verse 9. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. As we reach the end of this powerful journey through God's promises, let these words from the book of Joshua settle deep into your heart. This isn't just encouragement, it's a command. Be strong and courageous. And it's not a command given in isolation. It's anchored in an unshakable truth, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Think about that for a moment. Wherever you go. Not just in the church pews, not just in moments of worship, not just when life feels smooth and predictable, wherever. In the doctor's office, waiting for news, in the silence after a difficult conversation, in the uncertainty of a new beginning, in the loneliness of a closed door, God is there. This promise was given to Joshua as he stood on the edge of the promised land, ready to lead the Israelites into a place filled with both promise and challenge. The task ahead was overwhelming. The obstacles were real. But God didn't tell Joshua to rely on his own strength or wisdom. Instead, God gave him this command: be strong and courageous. It's a reminder for all of us. Strength and courage don't come from our circumstances, they come from God's presence. And as we've seen throughout this journey, every promise we've explored carries the same unshakable truth. God is with you. God is for you. God will not let you fall. Throughout this video, we've uncovered promises that speak to our fears, our anxieties, our uncertainties, and our hopes. We've seen how God promises to guide us, provide for us, strengthen us, and uphold us. And these aren't just comforting words, they are unbreakable covenants from the Creator of the universe. But here's the thing, promises are only as powerful as our willingness to believe them. God can promise peace, but we must choose to trust Him in the storm. God can promise strength, but we must choose to lean on Him when we feel weak. God can promise hope, but we must choose to hold on to it when everything feels uncertain. So let me ask you, what promise spoke to your heart today? What word resonated deep within your soul? Maybe it was God's promise to never leave you. Maybe it was His assurance of peace in the middle of chaos. Or perhaps it was His invitation to cast your anxieties onto Him. Whatever it was, don't let it fade away as soon as this video ends. Hold on to it. Write it down, speak it out loud, let it become the anchor for your faith in the days, weeks, and months ahead. And remember, God's promises aren't just for certain people, they're for you. They're for the parent praying over a wayward child, They're for the student facing an uncertain future. They're for the person battling illness, the worker dealing with burnout, and the dreamer wondering if it's too late to start again. Every promise we've explored is a reminder of one profound truth: you are not alone. As we bring this video to a close, I want to take a moment to thank you. Thank you for showing up, for taking the time to listen, and for opening your heart to these promises. Your presence here matters, not just to me, but to God. Every view, every moment spent reflecting on His Word is a seed planted in your heart. And I believe those seeds will grow into something beautiful. If this video touched your heart, I want to invite you to take a step further. Click that subscribe button and become part of this growing community. Every time you subscribe, like, or share, you're helping this message reach more people who might desperately need to hear these promises. Together, we can spread hope, truth, and the love of God to places we could never reach on our own. And as we wrap up, let me encourage you, don't stop here. On your screen, you'll see suggestions for other videos filled with reflections, encouragement, and truths straight from God's Word. Dive in, keep going, and let these promises become part of your everyday life. Before you leave, I want to ask you to do one more thing. In the comments below, share this declaration of faith. I trust in God's promises for my life. Let that be your bold statement today. A declaration that no matter what comes your way, you are choosing faith over fear, hope over despair, and trust over doubt. As you step away from this video and back into your daily life, carry this promise with you. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Let these words echo in your mind, strengthen your heart, and guide your steps. Because the God who made these promises is faithful, unchanging, and deeply invested in you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for walking this journey with me. And thank you for believing, truly believing in the power of God's promises. Until next time, stay strong, stay courageous, and remember, God is with you always.